Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to all my followers. Thank you for all the wisdom, all the gratitude, and thank you for everything you bring when you come and listen here today. This is another segment of my an extension of my podcast, Sacred Activism for Peacemaking and Ending Violence. And in particular, I want to talk about the rising tide of oppression that we're seeing here in the United States. And of course, this has existed around the world for hundreds of years, and maybe even further back than that. Because this is a shadow dimension, a soul sickness that humanity has carried for a very long time within our experience, an expression of our complex, messy human selves. So when I was in the former Soviet Union, particularly in 1983, which was still very much deep in the midst of the Cold War, one of the things that was so apparent was how oppressive the energy was at the time in Moscow. The Russian people had by then, and of course they are now, they had lived under authoritarian regimes, dictatorships. This long preceded the Russian Revolution and the rise of the Soviet Union around 1917. This was going back underneath the czars many centuries back. So, but the Soviet Union, with the greater technology available that was beginning to become available into the mid and latter 20th century, and into the early 20th century, in a way the ways of surveillance, of terror, of fear-mongering, were able to be done with, I would say, much more scientific, accuracy. The KGB, which was the police force that essentially spied on everybody, the secret police would be another way to call them, were everywhere. You didn't know who worked for the KGB. You didn't know who. If they knocked on your door, they didn't have insignia. They didn't have badges. They didn't have to even identify themselves, even as they dragged people away into jail, into prison, or disappeared them, or murdered them, and more. Now, back then, when I was there in 1983 and in 1991, which was right at the end of the Cold War, I mean, people, like all human beings do, whether there's war or authoritarianism or any manner of challenges politically, societally, everybody went about their business of putting food on the table and a roof over their heads, and got married and had babies and died, and took care of their lives to the best that they could, as best as they could, because the truth was that food was scarce, supply lines were backed up, the ways and means of industry creating food, and even supply lines from other countries, because Russia was determined to be self-sufficient and it had closed boundaries. it was hard to find food. So when I was there in 1983, folks, it was hard to find food. I mean, I was part of an undergraduate program learning Russian, and yes, in the Pushkin Institute where I was, we had breakfast, we had a cafe for lunch, we were served a meal at dinner time. But it was very slim pickings. And if you tried to go out and buy other food on the shelves, there wasn't a whole lot. I think I've subsisted on oranges and ice cream that I bought from street vendors. And then, if I were to go into a store and find some eggs or some onions, I mean, it was like we were over the moon, right? All right. You could go into fancier hotel restaurants and get served a meal. And, there was something we called mystery meat that was in our borscht, our soup. And we could also get kasha, which is kind of like oatmeal, basically, and maybe butter. But it was hard. And I came back from the Soviet Union weighing about 20 pounds less. I probably weighed around 100 pounds, which on my 5'1" frame, I mean, in pictures of me, because shortly thereafter I went to my sister's wedding, and I looked like I was starving. So that was the atmosphere. And among my friends, among my Russian friends, there was so much sense of depression, anxiety, and even despair. Because when you live in a closed system like that, where you are not allowed to speak freely, to write freely your thoughts, when you're not allowed to, you aren't allowed to be free. You aren't allowed to say anything that might seem even vaguely critical of the regime. People, they begin to shut down. People's creative output shuts down. So what I'm going to say about this is that overall, in 1983, and to some degree in 1991, when I was there for a postdoc, there was a very heavy, dark energy everywhere. Now back then, of course, I was a privileged American, but I was followed and kept track of by the KGB, something I was to learn in 1983 at the end of my stay there, and which was also obvious. Those of us who were studying Russia and the Soviet Union in college and grad school, I mean, we were told these things by our professors, by other students who had gone there before us, and so on, by Russians that we got to know who are immigrants. So we knew what it was about. And it was very hard not to get caught up in it when you were there, to not feel heavy and sad and depressed. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward to what is going on now. Oh, and I want to say lastly about that time is that I really wasn't doing any kind of spiritual practice. I was walking around carrying a heavy load of my own trauma, unhealed trauma. And so in terms of having a kind of any practices of energetic protection, spiritual upliftment, I didn't have them. Now, and that includes in 1991. Now, I want to fast forward to the present in the United States. And this is true of any country that has an authoritarian dictatorial system. But I'm going to speak specifically of the United States, because although the United States political system is very complicated, not always positive, has its problems. I would say that by and large, throughout my entire life, and I'm 64 making this video, I never felt oppressed by my government. Now, I'm a white woman, have been raised middle and upper middle class, have had work and plenty of money. So I'm going to frame this, the fact that I have not felt oppressed within the understanding that I am not a person of color. I am not African American. I'm not brown from Central or South America. I am not from the Middle East, right? I'm a white woman of European ancestry. So what makes my experience perhaps instructive in this time is that in the first 100 days of our current president's term in office, I have felt this tightening of the noose. I have felt an energy in the field, the societal field of oppression. And it is deeply disturbing. Now, I want to add the caveat, another caveat, which is that because I have done a lot of anti-racism teaching over decades, I have been able to feel that energy of oppression that people of color in this country have felt, going back hundreds of years. So I just also want to make sure that, one, going to the Soviet Union when I was in my early 20s, and then again when I was 30-ish, 30, in my 30, that I, just like this, in terms of understanding that energy, that vibration of oppression, which is a vibration, it is a particular vibrational frequency, that this is something that I knew, that I felt. And indeed, as a shamanic energy healer, when I journey to the lower world in order to extract my clients' personal ancestral wounds, and sometimes those connect in with humanity's collective wound, I will often feel this same energy of oppression. It could be the energy from an oppressive, abusive parent, or it could be the energy of racial oppression. It could be the energy of the oppression of some event from another lifetime where that individual lived under a system of some kind of oppression, whether it was personal, societal, collective, and even war. War brings a vibrational frequency of oppression and fear. So what I want to really say here is that this is a vibrational frequency. Now, what is happening currently in the United States is that while this vibrational frequency of oppression has already existed here in the United States, and poor people experience it. So I don't care if you're a person of color or you're a white person, but if you're poor, you experience it as well. Because any kind of system where there are haves and have-nots, and where a system is perpetuating inequity in the distribution of resources, down to the very simple things like just money for food, money for housing, then there is this vibrational frequency of oppression. And what I will say is that personally, as I'm feeling this rising tide, the amplification of this feeling of oppression, which is now going to affect everybody in the United States, bar none, just like it was affecting everybody in the Soviet Union, in Russia, bar none. Because once this system is in place and it is locked in, and it is in service of a dictator, an authoritarian style government, then it affects everyone. And it's going to affect, and it is already affecting here in the United States, people of color, even more than before, even more. It is worsening for them. And now, white people are beginning to feel it. So, the question is, in terms of being a sacred activist for peacemaking and ending violence, then how do we work with this energy? How do we work with it? For me, it is my spiritual practice. One thing I will say is that any kind of meditation is going to be helpful. Or taking walks and connecting with nature. We can do some very simple things that take us out of the energy in the environment, in the societal family environment, that connects us with this living energy, this love light that vibrates within, through, and around Mother Earth, and that actually vibrates within, through, and around each of us individually. We can call in help from angels and archangels, higher beings of light, so that we keep our energy vibrationally elevated to mitigate, decrease, or maybe even eliminate for a time this rising dark cloud or darkening cloud. Now, having offered these ideas, let me just say that you may still doing these things, though you may find yourself more buffered. And there are practices that I teach in my classes that will give you more and more layers of buffering and upliftment, vibrational upliftment. But you may still feel these energies, because the nature of this kind of system is that it becomes omnipresent. It is ever present. If and until we collectively rise up to end it. And now in the United States and on the world, we are being given a potent opportunity to do so. Not only through our spiritual practices, through our prayer work, but also by being engaged in some way to help others and to help ourselves through this time, in action, in sacred divine action. That can be protesting, that can be writing, calling your senators, or in whatever way you choose to engage. Now, lastly, I'm going to say is you don't have to engage. You don't. Not directly in that way. Not all of us are ready to do that, capable of doing that, particularly if we're struggling to put food on the table and a roof over our heads. That is the daily task, right? For raising children, taking care of elders, or ourselves are sick in some way, or are still deep in healing old trauma, so that it would be too challenging to put ourselves in places where that energy is very present. So in the meantime, be kind to yourself, be kind to your neighbors, spread kindness in whatever small ways you can do so. And keep hopeful, because I believe this is a powerful time of shift. I don't believe this is the end. I don't believe that humanity 7 generations from now is going to be living in this way any longer. So, may it be so. Aho Wado. May all of you be well and whole, safe and protected wherever you are, and your families too.